Sometimes life strips you down to nothing. No home, no savings, just you and your kid against the world. That's where Tobias Kern found himself at 47, moving into his late mother's falling-apart farmhouse in rural Missouri with his 8-year-old daughter. While cleaning out the attic to make it livable, he expected nothing but junk and dust. What he found instead changed everything. Hundreds of bags hung from the rafters and piled against the walls, each one tied tight with string, each one labeled in his mother's handwriting. She never told him about them, never explained why she spent decades hiding them away. When Toby opened the first bag, one question burned through him. What secret was his mother protecting? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The headlights cut through the darkness as Tobe pulled his truck onto the gravel driveway. The farmhouse stood there like a ghost from his childhood, its white paint grayed and peeling, the porch sagging on one side. Weeds had claimed the flower beds his mother once tended, and the barn out back leaned so far to the left it looked like a stiff wind might finally finish it off. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her face pressed to the window. She'd been quiet for the last hour of the drive, watching the landscape flatten into endless fields and scattered trees. Now she stared at the house with wide eyes. "This is where you grew up?" she asked. "This is it," Tobe said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Your grandma's house." It looked scary. He couldn't argue with that. In the dim light from the truck, the farmhouse looked like something from a horror movie. Broken shutters hung at odd angles. The front steps had gaps where boards had rotted through. One upstairs window was cracked, held together with duct tape that had yellowed with age. "It just needs some work," he said, more to himself than to Emma. "We'll fix it up. Make it nice." She looked at him with those serious brown eyes, so much like her mother's. "Do we have to stay here?" The question hit him harder than she probably meant it to. 6 months ago, they'd lived in a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. Emma had her own room painted purple, a backyard with a swing set, friends on every corner. Now they were here, in the middle of nowhere, because Toby had nothing left. The divorce had stripped him clean. Sarah got the house. She'd made more money, the judge said, had better prospects for maintaining the mortgage. She got most of the savings, too. Something about her contributions during the marriage, about his periods of unemployment. Tobe's lawyer had tried to fight it, but in the end, he'd signed the papers just to make it stop. For 3 months after, he and Emma had bounced between friends' couches and cheap motels. He'd picked up work where he could. Construction, delivery, driving, anything that paid cash. But it wasn't enough for rent, wasn't enough to give Emma stability. She'd started wetting the bed again, something she hadn't done since she was 4. She'd gotten quiet at school, her teacher said. Withdrawn. That's when Toby remembered the farmhouse. His mother had died 8 months ago, and he'd inherited the property. He hadn't wanted to come back, hadn't wanted to face the memories or the work it would take to make the place livable. But now, he had no choice. "Yeah, sweetie," he said gently. "We have to stay here for a while. But I promise I'll make it good for you." Emma nodded slowly, then reached for her backpack. It held everything she owned now. A few changes of clothes, her stuffed rabbit, the chapter book she was reading. Tobe's throat tightened looking at it. He grabbed their bags from the truck bed and led Emma up the porch steps, testing each board before putting his weight on it. The front door stuck in its frame, swollen from humidity and neglect. He had to put his shoulder into it before it scraped open. The smell hit them first. Dust and mildew and something else. Something stale and sad. Toby found the light switch and flipped it. Nothing happened. "Electricity's off," he said. "I'll get it turned on tomorrow." He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the living room, catching on familiar shapes shrouded in shadow. The old floral couch where he'd watched Saturday morning cartoons. The fireplace with its mantel full of photos. The rocking chair his mother had sat in every evening, always with a book, always alone. The kitchen was worse. Dishes still sat in the sink from whenever his mother had last used them. A half-empty coffee cup sat on the counter, a ring of mold growing inside. The refrigerator door hung open, and Tobias could see the dark shapes of spoiled food inside. "I don't like it here," Emma whispered. "I know, it's okay." He squeezed her shoulder. "Let's see if we can find somewhere to sleep tonight. Tomorrow we'll start cleaning." They climbed the stairs, the steps creaking under their weight. Tobe's old bedroom was at the end of the hall, untouched since he'd left for college at 18. The same posters on the walls, the same scratched desk, the same narrow bed with its faded blue comforter. "You can sleep in here with me tonight," he told Emma. "We'll get you your own room soon." She nodded and climbed onto the bed without bothering to change out of her clothes. Toby sat beside her, stroking her hair until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then he sat there in the darkness, letting the weight of everything settle on him. This house. God, this house. He'd spent his whole childhood here, but he'd never understood it. Never understood his mother's silence, her distance. She'd fed him and clothed him and made sure he did his homework, but there had always been something else, something she held back. Even as a boy, he'd felt it, the way she'd stare out the kitchen window for long minutes, lost in some private thought, the way she'd flinch when someone knocked on the door unexpectedly, the way she never talked about her past, never invited friends over, never seemed to connect with the other mothers in town. When Tobe was a teenager, he'd thought she was just cold, unloving. He'd resented her for it, counted down the days until he could leave, and when he finally did leave, he'd barely looked back. Visited maybe twice a year, called on holidays. When she died, he'd felt guilty about that, but he'd also felt relieved in a way he didn't like to examine too closely. Now, sitting in his childhood bedroom with his own daughter sleeping beside him, he wondered if there was more to it, something he'd been too young or too angry to see. The next morning came too bright and too early. Sunlight poured through the dusty windows, making the disrepair impossible to ignore. Emma woke up cranky and hungry. Toby realized he hadn't thought to bring any food. They drove into town, Cooper's Bend, population 3,200, the same as when he was a kid. The diner was still on Main Street, looking exactly like he remembered. They sat at the counter, and Emma ordered pancakes while Toby drank bitter coffee and tried to make a mental list of everything that needed doing. First, get the electricity turned on. Second, clean enough of the house to make it livable. Third, find work. Any kind of work that would keep them fed. The waitress, a woman about his age with tired eyes, refilled his coffee without being asked. "You're Helen Kern's boy, aren't you?" Toby looked up, surprised. "Yeah, Toby." "I thought so. You look like her around the eyes." She wiped down the counter, not quite meeting his gaze. "Sorry about your loss." She kept to herself, but she seemed like a good woman. "Thank you." The waitress nodded and moved away, but Toby noticed she'd stiffened slightly when she spoke about his mother. There was something in her tone, something careful and rehearsed. When they left the diner, Toby waved at an older man across the street. The man had been staring at them, but when Tobe waved, he turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction. Back at the farmhouse, Tobe called the utility company and arranged for the power to be turned back on. Then he grabbed a trash bag and started in the kitchen, throwing out everything that had spoiled. Emma helped, though she wrinkled her nose at the smell. By mid-afternoon, they'd made progress. The kitchen was cleaner, the living room dusted, the refrigerator emptied and wiped down. Tobe stood in the hallway, looking up at the narrow door that led to the attic. He hadn't been up there in 30 years. As a kid, he'd been forbidden. His mother had always kept it locked. said it was dangerous with all the old junk and weak floorboards. After she died, the lawyer handling the estate had asked if there was anything up there worth inventorying. Toby had said no without even checking. Now, looking at that door, he thought about space. The house had 3 bedrooms, but one was barely bigger than a closet, filled with his mother's sewing things. If he could clear out the attic, make it safe, Emma could have a real room, a place that was hers. "Stay down here, okay?" he told Emma. "I'm going to check something out." The attic door opened with a screech of protest. A set of steep wooden stairs led up into darkness. Toby found a flashlight in the kitchen drawer and climbed slowly, testing each step before trusting it with his weight. The heat hit him first. The attic was stifling, the air thick and still. Then his flashlight beam swept across the space, and he froze. Bags, hundreds of them. Plastic grocery bags, trash bags, paper bags, all tied at the top with string or twine. They hung from the rafters like strange fruit. They were stacked against the walls in careful rows. They filled every corner, every space, leaving only a narrow path through the center. Tobe moved forward slowly, his heart beating faster. Each bag had something written on it in black marker. Dates, his mother's handwriting, neat and precise. 1967 March, 1973 November, 1981 July, 1989 December. On and on, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some bags looked newer, the plastic still relatively clear. Others had yellowed with age, the writing faded but still legible. What the hell was this? Tobe reached for the nearest bag, one labeled 1967 March. The string came loose easily. He opened it and looked inside. Newspaper clippings. Dozens of them, all neatly cut out and folded. He pulled one out and unfolded it carefully. "Local girl missing," read the headline. "Search continues for Sarah Mitchum." The article was from the Cooper's Bend Gazette, dated March 15, 1967. It described how Sarah Mitchum, 17 years old, had vanished after school. Her car was found at the edge of the woods outside town, keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no note, no witnesses. Toby read through several more clippings from the same bag. Updates on the search, interviews with Sarah's parents, an article about a candlelight vigil. Then, a few months later, a final piece stating that the investigation had gone cold, that Sarah was presumed to have run away, but run away where? And why would his mother collect every article about it? He opened another bag, this one labeled 1973 November. More clippings, this time about a young man named David Chen who disappeared after his shift at the grocery store. His bicycle was found in a ditch. Same pattern, search, investigation, no leads, case went cold. Tobe's hands started to shake. He opened a third bag, then a fourth. Each one the same, each one documenting a missing person from Cooper's Bend. Different years, different people, but always the same careful collection of articles, the same meticulous record keeping. His mother had been collecting these for decades, since before he was born. She documented every disappearance, every unanswered question, every case that faded from public memory. Why? "Dad?" Emma's voice drifted up from below. "What are you doing?" Toby quickly stuffed the clippings back into the bag and tied it shut. His mind was racing. "Just looking around," he called down. "Lots of old junk up here. Be down in a minute." But he didn't go down. He stood there in the suffocating heat, surrounded by hundreds of bags, each one a mystery his mother had kept from him his entire life. Each one a secret she died without explaining. He looked around at the sheer volume of it all, and one question pushed itself to the front of his mind, demanding an answer. "What did you know, Mom? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Toby didn't sleep that night. He lay beside Emma in his old bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about those bags. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them hanging there like evidence at a crime scene. Every time he started to drift off, he'd jerk awake with his mother's handwriting flashing in his mind. 1967, March, 1981, July, 1989, December. What had she been doing up there all those years? What had driven her to collect and preserve all those articles, to label them so carefully, to hide them away where no one would find them? When the first grey light of dawn crept through the window, Tob gave up on sleep. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Emma, and climbed back up to the attic. In the daylight, what little filtered through the small, grimy window, the space looked even more overwhelming. The bags, stretched from one end to the other, organized with a precision that made Tob's chest tight. This wasn't a random hoarding of a disturbed mind. This was deliberate, systematic. He started at the beginning, with the oldest dates he could find. The bags from the 1960s were yellowed plastic, the kind that would crinkle loudly when touched. He worked through them methodically, opening each one, reading the contents, trying to find a pattern. Sarah Mitchum, 1967, 17 years old, disappeared after school. David Chen, 1973, 22 years old, vanished after work. Rebecca Marshall, 1978, 19 years old, never came home from a date. On and on. Different names, different years, but always the same basic story. Young people, mostly teenagers or in their early 20s. They disappeared without a trace. Searches were conducted. Investigations were opened. And then, after weeks or months, everything went quiet. The cases went cold. Life moved on. But his mother hadn't moved on. She'd kept every article, every update, every dead-end lead. Toby found a bag labeled 1981 July and opened it. The clippings inside were about a girl named Jennifer Holt, 16 years old. There were the usual news articles, but there was also something else. A handwritten note in his mother's precise script. Saw J.H. talking to R.W. outside the drugstore the day before she disappeared. R.W. was insistent. She looked uncomfortable. Told Sheriff Dawson. He said I must be mistaken. Toby read the note 3 times. His mother had witnessed something. She'd reported it, and she'd been dismissed. He dug deeper into the bag and found more notes. Observations his mother had made, things she'd seen or heard. Each one ended the same way. Told authorities, not taken seriously. Case closed anyway. His hands shook as he opened another bag. Then another. The pattern held. His mother hadn't just been collecting newspaper articles. She'd been conducting her own investigation, documenting what she saw, trying to piece together what the official investigations had missed or ignored. And no one had listened to her. By the time Emma called up asking for breakfast, Toby had gone through 24 bags. He'd found 12 separate missing persons cases, all from Cooper's Bend or the surrounding county. 12 young people who'd vanished between 1965 and 1995. 12 investigations that had gone nowhere. And his mother had tracked every single one. He climbed down from the attic with his mind spinning. Emma sat at the kitchen table, drawing in a notebook she'd found in his mother's things. "What's up there?" she asked without looking up from her drawing. "Just old papers," Toby said. "Stuff your grandma saved." Why did she save so much stuff? Good question. The best question. I'm trying to figure that out. After breakfast, Toby told Emma he needed to run into town. He left her with her notebook and strict instructions not to answer the door for anyone, then drove to the Cooper's Bend Public Library. The library was a small brick building that smelled like old books and furniture polish. The same librarian who'd worked there when Toby was in high school still sat at the front desk. Mrs. Haskell, her nameplate read. She looked up when he entered, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or something else. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for old newspapers," Toby said. "The Gazette," going back to the 60s if you have them. We have them on microfiche. What years specifically? All of them. I want to look at local news from 1965 to 2000. Mrs. Haskell's expression shifted. Her pleasant librarian smile faded. That's quite a range. What exactly are you researching? Family history. Toby lied. My mother lived here her whole life. I'm trying to learn more about what the town was like when she was young. It wasn't entirely a lie, but Mrs. Haskell didn't look convinced. She stood slowly and led him to a room in the back where the microfiche readers were kept. The films are organized by year in these cabinets. Let me know if you need anything. She left, but Toby noticed she didn't go far. Through the small window in the door, he could see her at her desk, glancing back toward the room every few minutes. He loaded the first film, January through June 1967, and started scrolling. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. Sarah Mitchum's disappearance had been front-page news for weeks. The articles matched what he'd found in his mother's bags, but reading them on the screen, in chronological order, gave him a fuller picture. Sarah had been a good student, well-liked, no history of running away. Her family was devastated. The sheriff at the time, Frank Dawson, the same one his mother had mentioned in her notes, had led the search personally. Dozens of volunteers combed the woods. Bloodhounds were brought in, the state police were called, and then, 6 weeks later, the story just stopped. One final article stated that the search was being scaled back, that Sarah was now listed as a runaway, that the case would remain open but no longer active. Toby made notes, then moved on to the next case. David Chen in 1973, Rebecca Marshall in 1978. Each time, the same pattern. Intense initial coverage, search efforts, then a quiet ending with the case going cold. But what struck Tobe wasn't just the pattern. It was the quotes from law enforcement. The same names appeared over and over. Sheriff Frank Dawson, Deputy Chief Robert Walsh, Judge Henry Morrison, who always seemed to be quoted offering condolences to the families. These men had been involved in every case. They'd led the searches, made the statements to the press, decided when to scale back the investigations, and according to his mother's notes, they'd dismissed her concerns every single time. Tobe spent 3 hours at the library, going through case after case. By the time he finished, he had a list of 12 missing persons, exactly matching the bags he'd found in the attic. 12 young people who'd vanished from Cooper's Bend over a 30-year period. 12 unsolved cases. He printed out several articles, feeding quarters into the machine, aware of Mrs. Haskell watching him through the window. When he finally emerged from the research room, she was standing right outside the door. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. Her voice was careful, measured. "Some of it," Toby said. "Your mother," Mrs. Haskell said suddenly. "Helen, she used to come in here too, spent hours in that same room looking at the same files." Tobe's pulse quickened. "Did she ever tell you why?" Mrs. Haskell shook her head slowly. "No, but I could see it in her face. Whatever she was looking for, it haunted her." She paused, then added quietly, "Some things in this town are better left alone, Mr. Kern." "What things?" But Mrs. Haskell just turned away. "We're closing early today. I'll need you to leave now." Toby glanced at the clock on the wall. It was only 3 in the afternoon. "Your sign says you're open until 6. "Family emergency," Mrs. Haskell said. Her voice had turned cold. "Please leave." Tobe gathered his printouts and left, but as he walked to his truck, he looked back. Mrs. Haskell stood in the library window, watching him. When their eyes met, she quickly pulled the shade down. On the drive home, Tobe's mind raced. His mother had been researching the same cases he was now looking at. She'd been tracking them for years, maybe decades. She'd tried to tell people what she knew, and she'd been shut down. And now, just hours after Toby started asking questions, the librarian had kicked him out, and warned him to let things lie. What was everyone so afraid of? Back at the farmhouse, Emma was right where he'd left her. She'd moved to the living room, sitting on the floor with photos spread around her, old pictures she'd found in a drawer. "Is this Grandma?" she asked, holding up a black and white photo. Toby looked. It was his mother, maybe 30 years old, standing in front of this very house. She was smiling, actually smiling, which was rare enough in his memories. But even in the photo, even with the smile, there was something sad in her eyes. Something distant. "Yeah," he said. "That's her. She looks lonely. Out of the mouths of children." "Yeah, sweetie. I think she was." That night, after Emma was asleep, Toby went back up to the attic. He worked by flashlight, not wanting to alert anyone outside to what he was doing. He opened bag after bag, reading his mother's notes, studying the clippings, and slowly, a terrible picture began to form. 12 people had disappeared from this town over 30 years. 12 investigations had gone nowhere. The same men had been involved every time. The sheriff, his deputies, the judge, certain prominent businessmen who always seemed to be quoted in the articles, always offering support and resources for the searches. And his mother had witnessed things. Things that didn't make it into the official record. Things she'd tried to report. Things she'd been told to forget about. Tobe sat back on his heels, surrounded by decades of his mother's secret work, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about missing persons. This was about a cover-up. And his mother had known it all along. Toby couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Over the next few days, as he continued working through his mother's collection, he noticed small things. A car that drove past the farmhouse twice in an hour, slowing down each time. The way conversations would stop when he walked into the hardware store. The careful distance people maintained when he took Emma to the park. Cooper's Bend had always been a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. But this was different. This wasn't small-town friendliness or even small-town nosiness. This was active avoidance, and it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He tried to focus on practical matters. He found work doing odd jobs, mowing lawns, fixing fences, whatever paid cash. It wasn't much, but it kept them fed and let him put a little aside for repairs on the house. Emma started at the local elementary school, though she came home quiet most days, not making friends the way she used to. But at night, after she was asleep, Toby returned to the attic. The bags had become an obsession. He'd organized them chronologically now, creating a timeline that stretched across the floor of his old bedroom. 12 cases, 12 victims, spanning from 1965 to 1995. The pattern his mother had documented was clear. Young people, usually between 16 and 25. All local, all from Cooper's Bend or within 10 miles. They disappeared without warning, without clear motive. Searches were conducted, but never seemed to go anywhere meaningful. And within weeks or months, each case went cold. What his mother had also documented, in her careful notes tucked inside the bags, were the inconsistencies. The witnesses who claimed to have seen things but were never formally interviewed. The evidence that seemed to vanish from official reports. The way certain names appeared in connection with each case, always in positions of authority, always controlling the narrative. Tobe made a list. Sheriff Frank Dawson, in charge of investigations from 1965 to 1992. Deputy Chief Robert Walsh, Dawson's right hand, later became sheriff himself. Judge Henry Morrison handled legal aspects, always seemed to be quoted in the press. Thomas Garrett owned the lumber mill, always involved in search efforts, always on the news. Richard Wade ran the town council for 30 years, another frequent presence in the articles. These 5 men, over and over, in every case. Always helpful, always concerned, always there. But nothing ever got solved, and his mother had tried to tell them what she'd seen. Toby found note after note documenting her attempts. She'd seen Sarah Mitchum talking to someone the day before she vanished. She'd seen David Jen's bicycle being moved from where he'd supposedly left it. She'd witnessed things that didn't match the official stories, and each time, she'd been dismissed. Told she was mistaken. Told to let the professionals handle it. Told, more than once according to her notes, to stop making trouble. On Thursday afternoon, Toby took Emma with him back to the library. He'd decided to try again, to dig deeper into the town's history. Maybe there was something he'd missed, some connection that would make sense of it all. Mrs. Haskell was at her desk again. When she saw him, her expression hardened. "Mr. Kern," she said, "I thought I made it clear that some subjects are best left alone." "I'm just doing research," Tobe said evenly. "Family history, like I said. Family history that involves 12 missing persons cases." So she'd been paying attention to what he was looking at. Of course she had. "My mother was interested in these cases," Toby said. "I'm trying to understand why." Mrs. Haskell glanced at Emma, who was browsing the children's section, then lowered her voice. "Your mother was a troubled woman, Mr. Kern. She saw things that weren't there. Made accusations that hurt good people." "What accusations?" "I can't help you," Mrs. Haskell said firmly. "The materials you want are in the back room, same as before. But I'm telling you, as someone who knew your mother, as someone who lived through those times, you're digging into things that will only bring you pain." "I'll take my chances," Toby said. He spent 2 hours in the research room, Emma sitting beside him with her coloring books. This time, Toby went deeper. He didn't just look at the missing persons articles, he looked at everything from those years. Town council meetings, business transactions, social announcements, and he found something interesting. In 1978, the year Rebecca Marshall disappeared, there was a town council vote on whether to allow state investigators to review local police procedures. The vote failed, 3-2. The 3 votes against: Thomas Garrett, Richard Wade, and council member John Bishop. In 1989, after 3 disappearances in 5 years, there was a proposal to bring in the FBI to create a task force. That proposal also failed, shut down by the same men. Every time there was movement toward outside oversight, toward bringing in authorities who weren't local, it was blocked. Always by the same people, always with the same reasoning. "We handle our own problems here. We don't need outsiders. These are isolated incidents, not a pattern." But it was a pattern. Tobe could see it clear as day. He printed more articles, made more notes. When he finally emerged from the research room, Mrs. Haskell was standing there again with her arms crossed. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "Why?" Tobe asked. "What am I going to find that scares you so much?" She flinched at that. "I'm not scared. I'm trying to protect you. And that little girl." She nodded toward Emma. "There are people in this town who won't appreciate you stirring up the past." "People like who?" But Mrs. Haskell just shook her head and walked away. On the drive home, Toby noticed a dark sedan, 2 cars behind them. It followed them all the way to the farmhouse, then drove slowly past as Tobe pulled into the driveway. He couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows. Inside, while Emma did her homework at the kitchen table, Toby called an old family friend. Jack Brennan had lived in Cooper's Bend his whole life, had known Tobe's mother for decades. If anyone could tell him the truth, it would be Jack. The phone rang 4 times before Jack picked up. "Toby," Jack said. His voice sounded wary. "How are you settling in?" "Fine," Toby said. "Jack, I need to ask you about something." "About what?" "About Mom. About what she was doing all those years." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "I don't know what you mean." "The missing persons cases, Jack. She was tracking them. She had boxes and boxes of newspaper clippings, notes, evidence." "Stop," Jack said sharply. Don't talk about this on the phone. What? Meet me tomorrow. The old grain mill on Route 7 around noon. And Tob, don't tell anyone you're coming. Jack hung up before Toby could respond. Toby stood there holding the phone, his heart pounding. Don't talk about this on the phone. Don't tell anyone you're coming. What the hell had his mother gotten into? And more importantly, what had Toby just stepped into by continuing her work? That night, he lay in bed listening to the house settle around him. Old wood creaking, wind rattling the windows, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of a car engine idling on the road. He got up and looked out the window. The dark sedan was parked about 100 yards down the street, headlights off but engine running. As Tob watched, it slowly pulled away, disappearing into the darkness. Someone was watching him. Someone knew he was asking questions. And based on Jack's reaction, based on Mrs. Haskell's warnings, based on the way the whole town seemed to tense up whenever he mentioned the past, someone had a lot to lose if the truth came out. Tob thought about his mother, spending decades in that attic, collecting evidence, documenting what she saw, being dismissed and ignored and told to be quiet. She'd been trying to expose something big enough that even now, years after most of the key players were dead or retired, people were still afraid of it coming to light. Tob looked over at Emma, sleeping peacefully in the bed beside him. Tomorrow he'd meet with Jack and get answers. Tonight, he'd keep watch and make sure his daughter stayed safe. Because one thing was becoming very clear. His mother hadn't been paranoid or crazy or troubled. She'd been right, and people had worked very hard to make sure no one believed her. The old grain mill sat abandoned on the edge of town, its windows broken and walls covered in graffiti. Toby pulled into the gravel lot at 5 minutes to noon, scanning the area for Jack's truck. It was already there, parked in the shade of an old oak tree. He'd left Emma with a neighbor, one of the few people in town who didn't seem actively hostile, just indifferent. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down. She'd agreed to watch Emma for a few hours without asking too many questions. Jack was standing by his truck, looking older than Toby remembered. He'd aged more than the 2 years since Toby had last seen him at his mother's funeral. His face was drawn, and there were deep circles under his eyes. "Thanks for meeting me," Toby said. Jack nodded and gestured toward the mill. "Let's walk. I don't want anyone seeing my truck parked with yours for too long." They walked along the overgrown path that circled the property. Jack kept his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the horizon like he expected someone to appear at any moment. "Your mother," Jack said finally. "She was a good woman, the best I've known." "She was tracking something," Toby said. "Missing persons cases going back decades. I found everything in the attic, hundreds of bags full of clippings and notes." Jack closed his eyes briefly. "She showed me some of it years ago. I told her to let it go, told her it was too dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "You have to understand," Jack said. "This town, it's got a long memory and a lot of secrets. Some of those secrets are protected by people with power. Tell me about the missing persons." Jack was quiet for a long moment, then started talking. "It started in the 60s. Kids would disappear. Always the same type. Young, alone, vulnerable in some way. Runaways, people said. Kids looking for adventure. But your mother didn't buy it. She paid attention. She noticed patterns." "What kind of patterns?" "Timing. The disappearances happened in clusters, 2 or 3 in a few years. Then nothing for a while. And they were always handled the same way. Big search initially. Lots of public concern. Then things would quiet down. Cases would go cold. Families would be told their kids ran off. Probably ended up in St. Louis or Kansas City. Probably didn't want to be found." "But Mom didn't believe that." "No," Jack said. "She didn't. She knew some of these kids. Sarah Mitchum used to babysit you when you were a baby. Sweet girl, loved her family. Helen said there was no way Sarah ran off without a word, and she saw things. Things that didn't add up. What things? Jack stopped walking and turned to face Toby. This is where it gets complicated. Your mother saw one of the missing girls, Jennifer Holt, back in 81, talking to Robert Walsh the day before she disappeared. Walsh was a deputy then. Helen said Jennifer looked uncomfortable, like she was trying to get away, but Walsh kept grabbing her arm. She reported it, told Sheriff Dawson what she saw. And Dawson told her she was mistaken. Said Walsh was a good man, a good officer. Said Helen must have seen someone else, or misinterpreted what was happening. Then he told her, and I remember this because Helen repeated it to me word for word. He told her that making false accusations against law enforcement could have serious consequences. Tobe felt anger flare in his chest. He threatened her. Not directly, but yes. And after that, every time Helen tried to report something she had seen, she was shut down, dismissed, made to feel like she was crazy or troublesome. Eventually, she stopped going to the police, started keeping her own records instead. Did she know what was happening? Who was responsible? Jack sighed heavily. She had theories. Nothing she could prove. She thought it was connected to the men who ran the town, the sheriff's department, the town council, certain business owners. She thought they were covering for someone, or for each other. Maybe they were involved directly. Maybe they just looked the other way. But she was convinced it wasn't random. Convinced there was a predator in Cooper's Bend, and he'd been operating for decades. The word hung in the air between them. Predator. Why didn't she go to the state police? The FBI? She tried, Jack said. In 1989, after 3 disappearances in 5 years, she drove to the state capitol, met with investigators, showed them her evidence. They were interested at first. Opened a preliminary inquiry, but then it got shut down. By who? Someone with connections. Judge Morrison, probably. Or one of the others. They had reached beyond Cooper's Bend. Money, influence. Within a week, the investigation was closed. Insufficient evidence, they said. No clear pattern of criminal activity. Just unfortunate coincidences and a grieving community. And Mom. She got a visit from Sheriff Walsh. He was sheriff by then, after Dawson retired. He told her she was lucky they weren't charging her with filing false reports. Told her to stop making trouble or she'd find herself in real difficulty. Tobe thought about his mother, alone in that farmhouse, collecting evidence that no one would look at. Fighting a battle she couldn't win. Jack, be straight with me. Do you think these men, Dawson, Walsh, the others, do you think they were directly involved in the disappearances? Jack looked at him for a long moment. I think they knew something. I think they protected someone. Whether they were involved themselves or just covering up for someone else, I don't know. Your mother thought Walsh and Garrett were the most suspicious, but she could never prove anything. Some of these men are still alive. Walsh is, Jack said. Retired now, lives over in Millbrook. Garrett died 5 years ago. Morrison is in a nursing home, barely knows his own name. The others are long gone. What about evidence? Physical evidence? Jack shook his head. That's the thing. Bodies were never found. Evidence never surfaced. These kids just vanished like they'd never existed. After a while, people stopped talking about it. Moved on. Only the families remembered, and even they learned to stay quiet. Why? Because speaking up got you nowhere. Asking questions got you labeled as a troublemaker. And in a small town like this, being a troublemaker can destroy your life. Your mother found that out the hard way. Toby thought about his childhood, about the way other kids' parents had always seemed wary of his mother, the way she'd never been invited to social gatherings, the way people had whispered when she walked by. They ostracized her, he said. Yes, it wasn't official, wasn't organized. But word got around that Helen Kern was difficult, that she made wild accusations, that she wasn't quite right in the head. People avoided her, and they avoided you by extension. I'm sorry about that, Toby. I should have done more to help her. You're helping now, Toby said. Jack, I need to ask you something. If I keep digging into this, if I try to finish what Mom started, am I putting Emma in danger? Jack didn't answer right away. He looked out across the abandoned mill at the broken windows and crumbling brick. Most of the men involved are dead or too old to be a threat, he said finally. But there's still a culture of silence here. Still people who'd rather keep the past buried. You start making noise, asking questions, showing people your mother's evidence. You're going to make some folks uncomfortable. That's not an answer. I know. Jack met his eyes. Here's what I'll tell you. If there was a predator in Cooper's Bend, if he was protected all those years, he's probably dead now too. The statistical likelihood of a serial offender operating from the 60s into the 90s and still being alive and active is pretty low. So the physical danger might be minimal. But secrets have a life of their own, and people who've spent decades protecting secrets don't give them up easy. You keep pushing. You might not face violence, but you'll face resistance. Doors closing in your face. Jobs drying up. Your daughter being treated the way you were as a kid. Toby absorbed this. Mom lived with that for 40 years. She did, and it broke my heart watching it. They started walking back toward the trucks. Tobe's mind was churning through everything Jack had told him. His mother hadn't been paranoid. She'd been systematic. She'd seen things, reported things, been shut down and threatened and isolated for trying to do the right thing. There's one more thing, Jack said as they reached the parking lot. In one of our last conversations before she died, your mother told me she'd found something new. Something that tied everything together. She wouldn't tell me what. Said it was too dangerous. Said if anything happened to her, it would be in the attic with everything else. Toby's pulse quickened. I've gone through most of the bags. I haven't found anything like that. Keep looking, Jack said. She specifically said it was there. Said it was proof of what she'd suspected all along. He climbed into his truck, then rolled down the window. Toby, I knew your mother for 40 years. She was the strongest, most stubborn person I ever met. If you're anything like her, you won't let this go. Just be careful. And if you need someone to talk to, someone who believes you, you call me. Toby nodded, then watched Jack drive away. He stood there in the gravel lot for a long time, thinking. His mother had found something. Something important enough that she'd hidden it. Something she'd died without revealing. And Toby was going to find it. Toby returned to the attic that night with fresh purpose. His mother had found something. Proof, Jack had said. Something that tied everything together. He just had to find it. He worked systematically, going through every bag he'd already examined, looking for anything he might have missed. The heat was oppressive, sweat dripping down his face as he sorted through decades of documentation. Then, tucked in a bag labeled 1978, August, he found a manila envelope he'd overlooked before. Inside were photographs. Not newspaper clippings, not official documents. Personal photographs his mother had taken. The first few were innocuous. Town events, the county fair, a 4th of July parade. But his mother had circled certain faces in red ink. Robert Walsh, young and fit in his deputy's uniform. Thomas Garrett laughing at some joke. Richard Wade shaking hands with the mayor. But it was the next set of photos that made Tobe's breath catch. They were surveillance photos, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. His mother had photographed these men at various locations over the years, always the same core group, always together or in proximity to each other. One photo showed Walsh and Garrett talking outside the old grain mill. Another showed Richard Wade meeting with Judge Morrison in what looked like a parking lot behind a restaurant. The dates written on the backs of the photos corresponded with the disappearances. August 12, 1978. 2 days before Rebecca Marshall vanished. November 3rd, 1989. The day William Morrison, no relation to the judge, disappeared. His mother had been watching them, documenting their movements, looking for patterns. Toby spread the photos across the attic floor, organizing them by date and person. As he worked, a picture emerged. These 5 men, Dawson, Walsh, Morrison, Garrett, and Wade, had been connected for decades. They met regularly, often in out-of-the-way places, and those meetings seemed to cluster around the times when people disappeared. It wasn't proof, not legally, but it was compelling. Damn compelling. He found more envelopes in other bags. His mother had been documenting these men's movements for years. In one bag from 1995, he found a photo that made his stomach turn. It showed Walsh, by then the sheriff, standing with a young man outside the grocery store. The young man's face was circled in red, and on the back his mother had written, Timothy Morrison, last seen June 15, 1995. Talking to Walsh on June 14th. Walsh claimed never saw him. The last disappearance. The last case. Timothy Morrison had been 21 years old, working as a clerk at the grocery store. His bicycle had been found in a ditch the next day. No other evidence. Case went cold within weeks, and the sheriff who'd investigated it had been photographed with the victim the day before. He vanished, a fact that apparently never made it into the official record. Tobe sat back, his mind reeling. This was more than his mother's suspicions. This was documentation of lies, of cover-ups, of a pattern that couldn't be coincidence. The next morning, Toby took Emma to school, then drove to the hardware store. He needed supplies to continue repairs on the farmhouse, but he also needed to test something. He needed to see how people would react if he started asking questions more openly. The store was run by Ed Fletcher, a man who'd been around Cooper's Bend his whole life. When Tobe walked in, Ed looked up from the counter and his expression immediately shuttered. "Help you?" Ed asked, his tone flat. "Need some drywall screws and sandpaper," Toby said. Then, casually, "Ed, you've lived here a long time. You remember the Morrison kid? Timothy? Went missing back in the 90s. Ed's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago." "Yeah, but I'm curious. You must have known him. Small town and all." "I knew him." Ed turned away, busying himself with something behind the counter. "Good kid. Same what happened." "What do you think happened?" Ed's shoulders stiffened. "How should I know? Kid probably ran off, that's what they said. But you don't believe that." Ed spun around, his face flushed. "I don't think about it at all, Mr. Kern, and neither should you. Now do you want these supplies or not?" Toby held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "I'll take them." He paid in silence and left. But as he loaded the supplies into his truck, he noticed Ed on the phone through the store window, talking urgently to someone. Word would spread. People would know he was asking questions. Good. Let them know. That afternoon, Emma came home from school upset. She'd had a playdate invitation, the first since starting at the new school. A girl named Kayla had invited her over, but when Emma had given Kayla's mother their address, the woman's face had changed. "She said maybe another time," Emma told Toby, her eyes welling with tears. "But Kayla said her mom told her she's not allowed to play at our house." "Why, Dad? What's wrong with our house?" Toby pulled her into a hug, feeling his heart break a little. "There's nothing wrong with our house, sweetheart. Some people they're just stuck in the past. It's not about you." "Is it about Grandma?" He pulled back to look at her. "What do you mean?" "Some kids at school said their parents told them Grandma was weird, that she made up stories about people and got them in trouble." Toby felt anger flare hot in his chest. They were poisoning his daughter against his mother's memory, against the woman who'd spent her life trying to seek justice, who'd been punished for speaking truth. "Your grandma," Toby said carefully, "was brave. She saw things that were wrong, and she tried to make them right. Some people didn't like that. Sometimes when you stand up for what's true, people try to make you look bad. Emma absorbed this, her young face serious. Is that what you're doing? Looking at her papers? Standing up for what's true? Yeah, sweetie, I am. Then I want to help. Tob started to say no. To tell her she was too young, that she didn't need to be involved. But then he looked at her determined expression and saw his mother looking back at him. 3 generations of Kearns, all of them stubborn, all of them unwilling to let injustice slide. Okay, he said, but you have to promise me something. If I tell you it's getting too dangerous, if I say we need to stop, you listen to me. Deal. Deal. That evening, Tob showed Emma some of the photographs. The innocent ones, nothing that would frighten her. He explained that Grandma had been trying to help people, trying to find answers about what happened to kids who went missing. Emma studied the photos with intense concentration. Then she pointed at one. That man's mean. Toby looked. She was pointing at Robert Walsh in his sheriff's uniform. Why do you say that? His eyes. They're cold. Tob looked more closely. Emma was right. Walsh's smile in the photo didn't reach his eyes. There was something predatory in his expression, something that made Toby's skin crawl. Smart girl, he said softly. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Tob continued his search through the attic, and this time in a bag labeled Personal 1982, he found something new. A journal. His mother's handwriting filled page after page, dated entries going back to the early 80s. He opened it carefully, the leather binding cracked with age. The first entry was from March 1982. I saw her today, Sarah Mitchum, or I think it was her. She'd be 32 now, the age she should have been if she'd lived. But this woman looked just like her. Same eyes, same smile. I followed her to the grocery store, my heart pounding. When she turned around, I saw it wasn't Sarah. Couldn't be. Sarah is gone. They took her, and they made sure no one would ever find her. But I see her everywhere. I see all of them. Jennifer, David, Rebecca. They haunt me because I couldn't save them, because I knew something was wrong and no one would listen. Tob's throat tightened. He turned the page. I've decided to keep records. If the authorities won't listen, if they won't investigate properly, then I will. I'll document everything. Every disappearance, every lie, every inconsistency. Maybe someday someone will believe me. Maybe someday the truth will matter more than protecting powerful men. He read on, page after page. His mother's fear was palpable in the writing. So was her determination. She wrote about seeing things that didn't fit the official narratives. About being warned to stay quiet. About the isolation that grew as she persisted. And she wrote about her son. About Toby. I worry what this is doing to him. The other children avoid him because their parents avoid me. He doesn't understand why we're different, why we don't get invited to things. I've tried to protect him from knowing, but children sense these things. Sometimes I wonder if I should stop, let it all go, give him a normal childhood. But then I think about those missing kids and I can't. I just can't let them be forgotten. Toby had to stop reading, his eyes blurred with tears. His mother had sacrificed her reputation, her social life, her son's happiness, all for people she'd never met, for justice that seemed impossible to achieve. She'd been a hero, and the town had treated her like she was crazy. He wiped his eyes and kept reading, and 3 pages later he found an entry that made everything click into place. June 20th, 1995. I finally have proofs. Tob's hands shook as he read the entry again. June 20th, 1995. I finally have proofs. He flipped through the journal frantically, looking for the next entry, for an explanation of what proof she'd found. But the next several pages had been torn out. Clean cuts, deliberate removal. The journal picked up again 3 weeks later, but that entry was cryptic. I've hidden it where they'll never think to look. If something happens to me, at least the truth will survive. TB will find it eventually. He's smarter than they think. TB, Tobias. She'd left it for him. But where? He'd been through hundreds of bags now. If there was something else, something beyond the photos and clippings and notes, he hadn't found it yet. Toby looked around the attic at the remaining bags he hadn't examined. Maybe 24 left. Whatever his mother had found, it had to be in one of them. He worked through the night, methodically opening each bag, examining every item. Most contained more the same: newspaper clippings, his mother's observations, photos. But then, in a bag labeled equipment, he found something different. A microcassette recorder. The kind reporters used in the 90s. It was old, the plastic yellowed, the battery compartment corroded. But there was a tape inside. Tobe's heart hammered as he climbed down from the attic and found fresh batteries in the kitchen drawer. His hands fumbled as he installed them, then pressed play. Static at first. Then his mother's voice, low and shaky. "This is Helen Kern. The date is June 18th, 1995. I'm recording this because I'm afraid if I don't document what I'm about to witness, no one will believe me." More static, rustling sounds like she was moving. "I followed Robert Walsh from the sheriff's office tonight. He drove to the old grain mill. I'm parked about 200 yards away, using my binoculars. He's meeting someone." A long pause. Toby could hear his mother's breathing, fast and nervous. "It's Thomas Garrett. They're talking. Walsh looks angry. Garrett is gesturing, trying to calm him down. I wish I could hear what they're saying." Another pause. Longer this time. "They're talking about someone. Walsh just pointed to his car, and oh God, there's someone in the back seat. A young man, I think. He looks unconscious, or..." His mother's voice broke off. Toby could hear her sharp intake of breath. "It's the Morrison boy, Timothy Morrison. He's been missing for 3 days. They said he ran away, but he's in Walsh's car, and he's not moving. Garrett just opened the trunk of his own car. They're moving him. They're transferring him from Walsh's car to Garrett's trunk." Toby felt sick. He forced himself to keep listening. They're covering their tracks. This is proof. This is finally proof that they're involved. I need to... The recording cut off abruptly. There was silence for a few seconds. Then it started again. His mother's voice was even lower now, barely a whisper. "They almost saw me. Walsh looked in my direction. I ducked down, held my breath. They're leaving now, driving in opposite directions. Garrett went west toward the county line. Walsh back toward town. I'm going to take this to the state police. I have to. Timothy Morrison's family deserves to know what happened to their son. All the families deserve to know." The recording ended. Toby played it again. Then a third time. His mother had witnessed Walsh and Garrett moving Timothy Morrison's body. She'd recorded herself describing it in real time. This wasn't speculation or suspicion. This was eyewitness testimony. This was evidence of murder and cover-up. But Timothy Morrison had disappeared in June 1995. The journal entry about having proof was dated June 20th, 1995. And his mother had died in February of this year, more than 24 years later. Why hadn't she gone to the state police? Why hadn't she used this recording? Toby thought about the torn pages in the journal, about the way his mother had lived the rest of her life in isolation and fear. Something had happened. Something had stopped her from using the evidence she'd gathered. He needed answers. He needed to know what had happened after his mother made that recording. The next morning, Tobe called Jack again. They met at the same place, the old grain mill, the very location his mother had described in the recording. Toby played the tape for Jack. He watched the older man's face go pale, watched his hands clench into fists. "Jesus Christ," Jack whispered when it ended. She had them. She actually had them. Jack, this recording is from June 1995. Mom died in February of this year. What happened in between? Why didn't she use this? Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring at the grain mill. I don't know all of it, but I know that in July of 1995, your mother's house was broken into. She called me, terrified. Said nothing was taken, but things had been moved. Her filing cabinet had been opened, papers shuffled through. She knew someone had been searching for something. The recording. Probably. Or the photos. Anything that could incriminate them. A few days later, she got a visit from Sheriff Walsh himself. He told her there had been complaints about her conducting surveillance, that it was illegal to photograph people without permission, threatened to charge her with stalking. That's ridiculous. Of course it is. But it scared her. And then... Jack paused, his face pained. Then something happened to you. Toby felt cold. What do you mean? You were 18, just started college. You were home for a weekend visit. Got pulled over for a broken taillight on your way back to school. The officer said he smelled marijuana in your car, searched it, found a bag of pills in your glove compartment. Toby remembered. He'd been terrified, confused. He'd never done drugs, had no idea how the pills got there. The officer had let him go with a warning, said he'd give him a break this one time. At the time, Tobe had thought he'd been lucky. They planted them, he said slowly. They planted drugs in my car to threaten Mom. That's what she believed. Walsh came to see her the next day. Told her that her son had narrowly avoided serious trouble, but next time he might not be so understanding. Said she needed to think about the kind of attention she was bringing to her family. So she stopped. She buried the evidence and stayed quiet to protect me. Yes, Jack said. I tried to convince her to go forward anyway, to contact the FBI to do something. But she was terrified for you. Said she'd already lost too much, couldn't risk losing her son too. Toby closed his eyes, grief and rage warring in his chest. His mother had sacrificed everything for him. The truth, justice for those missing kids, her own peace of mind, all of it set aside to keep him safe. Jack, some of these men are still alive. Walsh is still alive. He can't be allowed to get away with this. I agree. But you need to be smart about it. If you go to the local police, you get nowhere. They're still connected, still protective of their own. Then who? State police, maybe FBI, someone with jurisdiction and no local ties. Jack pulled out his phone. I have a contact, Detective Sarah Chen with the Missouri State Highway Patrol. She specializes in cold cases and police corruption. If anyone will take this seriously, it's her. Toby took the number Jack offered. You trust her? I served with her father in Vietnam. She's good people, honest, and she's got no love for cops who abuse their power. They parted ways, and Toby drove home with his mind churning. He had the recording, he had the photos, he had his mother's meticulous documentation spanning 30 years. It was time to stop investigating in secret. Time to bring this into the light. But first, he needed to make sure Emma was safe. That evening, he sat her down at the kitchen table. Emma, I need to talk to you about something serious. She put down her coloring pencil and looked at him with those solemn brown eyes. About Grandma? Yeah, I found something she left behind. Evidence about what happened to those missing kids. It's important, and I'm going to take it to the police. The real police, not the ones here in town. Will it help? I think so. I think it might finally give those families some answers. But Emma, it might also make some people angry. People who don't want the truth to come out. She processed this with the seriousness of someone much older than 8. Will we be okay? Yes, Tobe said firmly. I'll make sure of it. But I need you to promise me something. If anyone you don't know tries to talk to you at school, you don't engage with them. You find our teacher immediately. And if anything feels wrong or scary, you call me right away. I promise." He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. 3 generations of his family had been touched by this town's secrets. His mother had spent her life fighting them. He'd spent his childhood suffering the consequences. Emma would not carry that burden forward. This ended now. Over the next week, Toby prepared. He organized everything chronologically, created a master timeline, made copies of the most important documents. He transcribed his mother's recording, though he kept the original tape safe. He wrote out everything Jack had told him, everything his mother had documented. The evidence was damning. Even if it wasn't enough for criminal charges, too much time had passed, too many principals were dead. It was enough to expose what had happened. Enough to give families closure. Enough to clear his mother's name. On a Tuesday morning, Toby called Detective Chen and explained the situation in broad strokes. She was skeptical at first, as she should be, but when he mentioned the recording and the pattern of disappearances, her tone changed. "I can meet you this Thursday," she said. "Bring everything you have. And Mr. Kern, if what you're telling me is true, this is going to get complicated. Are you prepared for that?" "I am," Toby said. He hung up and looked around the farmhouse. The place was looking better now. He'd fixed the porch, replaced the broken windows, cleaned years of neglect from every room. Emma had her own room. The attic, transformed from a repository of secrets into a bright space with new paint and curtains she'd picked out herself. His mother's burden was ending. The weight she'd carried for 40 years was about to be lifted. Tobe just hoped he was strong enough to carry it the rest of the way. The night before his meeting with Detective Chen, Toby couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Jack had said, about the proof his mother had found. He discovered the recording, the photos, the documentation. But something nagged at him. His mother's journal entry had been so certain. "I finally have proofs." Not "I'm gathering proof" or "I think I have proofs." Definite, certain, final. There was something else, something he hadn't found yet. At 2 a.m, Toby gave up on sleep and climbed back into the attic. He'd been through every bag multiple times now, but he approached it differently this time. Instead of looking for obvious evidence, he looked for anything unusual, anything that seemed out of place. Most of the bags were chronological, organized by year and month. But there were a few that didn't fit the pattern. Personal bags, labeled with just the word personal or private or before. Before. He'd seen that one but hadn't paid much attention to it. Before what? Toby found the bag tucked in the far corner, behind several others. It was different from the rest. Made of heavier canvas rather than plastic, tied with a leather cord instead of string. His hands trembled as he untied it. Inside were documents he'd never seen before. Official documents. A birth certificate for a child born in 1972. The mother's name was Helen Elizabeth Kern. The father's name was listed as unknown. The child's name was Lillian Kern. Toby stared at the certificate, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. His mother had given birth in 1972, but he'd been born in 1976. That meant he had a sister, or had had one. He dug deeper into the bag, pulling out more documents. A missing person report filed in July 1976. Lily Ann Kern, age 4, disappeared from the front yard of the family home on Maple Street. Last seen playing near the porch. Mother stepped inside for less than 5 minutes. Child vanished. Tobe's throat tightened. He found more paperwork. Police reports, search records, newspaper clippings. The coverage was different from the other cases his mother had documented. More personal, more detailed. Because this wasn't some stranger's child. This was her daughter. The articles described the search efforts. Volunteers combed the woods for days. Bloodhounds were brought in. Sheriff Frank Dawson himself led the investigation, assuring the public that everything possible was being done. But Helen Kern had told a different story. Toby found her handwritten account, dated August 1976, 2 months after Lily disappeared. I saw him. I know I saw him. The man who took Lily. He was in our yard that afternoon, I remember now. A tall man with dark hair standing by the fence. I thought he was a neighbor, thought nothing of it at the time. But when I came back outside and Lily was gone, he was gone too. I told Sheriff Dawson. I described him. He matched the description of Robert Walsh. Walsh was only a deputy then, but I knew him. Everyone knew him. Dawson told me I was mistaken, that Walsh had been on duty that day, that I was confused by grief, but I know what I saw. Tobe's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the paper. Robert Walsh, the same man who'd appear in every subsequent case his mother documented. The same man who'd threatened her, who covered up Timothy Morrison's murder. He'd taken Lily. He'd taken his mother's 4-year-old daughter. Toby kept reading, tears streaming down his face. His mother had tried everything. She'd gone to the state police, to Child Protective Services, to anyone who would listen. But Walsh had an alibi. Other officers vouched for him, said he'd been on duty, couldn't possibly have been at the Kern house. The investigation into Lily's disappearance concluded that she'd wandered off and gotten lost in the woods. Despite extensive searches, her body was never found. The case went cold. But Helen hadn't stopped searching. She documented every disappearance after Lily's, looking for patterns, looking for proof that what she knew was true, that there was a predator in Cooper's Bend and he wore a badge. Toby found photos of Lily, a beautiful little girl with dark curls and a bright smile. There were maybe a dozen pictures, all from her short life. Lily as a baby. Lily learning to walk. Lily on her 3rd birthday, blowing out candles. And one photo that broke Tobe's heart. Lily holding a newborn baby. The back of the photo was labeled, Lily meets her brother Tobias, March 1976. He'd been 4 months old when she disappeared. He had no memory of her, had never even known she existed. But she'd existed. She'd been real. She'd held him as a baby. And then she'd been taken, and his mother had spent the next 40 years trying to prove what had happened to her. Everything made sense now. The obsession with the missing persons cases, the careful documentation, the refusal to let go even when the whole town turned against her. This wasn't about abstract justice or civic duty. This was about a mother who'd lost her child and couldn't rest until she'd found the truth. Tobe sat in the attic surrounded by his mother's life's work, and he wept. For Lily, the sister he'd never known. For his mother, who'd lived with this grief every single day. For himself, who'd grown up thinking his mother was cold and distant when really she was just broken. When he finally composed himself, he kept searching through the bag. And at the very bottom, he found an envelope marked, "For Tobias. Only open if something happens to me." His mother's final message. Inside was a letter, written in her careful hand. The paper was dated just 3 weeks before her fatal heart attack. "My dearest Tobias, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope I had the chance to tell you everything in person, but if I didn't, I need you to understand why I lived the way I did, why I was the mother I was. Your sister Lily was taken from me in July of 1976. You were just a baby. I saw the man who took her, but I couldn't prove it. I spent every day since then trying to build a case, trying to collect enough evidence that someone would finally believe me. I've documented 12 missing persons cases because I believe they're all connected to the same man, Robert Walsh, who's been protected by the system he serves. I have recorded evidence of Walsh and Thomas Garrett moving Timothy Morrison's body in 1995. I have photographs of these men in proximity to victims just before they vanished. I have testimonies that were never officially recorded, statements that were suppressed. All of it is in the attic, organized chronologically. But I also have something more concrete, something I discovered just last month. In 1978, 2 years after Lily disappeared, someone reported finding children's bones in the woods near the old quarry. The bones were collected by the sheriff's office, but were never officially logged as evidence. The report was buried. I found reference to it in old county records that were being digitized. The deputy who collected them wrote a note saying he'd given them to Sheriff Dawson for analysis. They were never analyzed. They disappeared from evidence. I hired a private investigator last year, spent every penny I had, to search the woods near that quarry. He found a location that matches the description from that 1978 report. We marked it on a map. The map is in this envelope. I couldn't go to the authorities with this. They'd bury it again, just like they buried everything else. But you can, Tobias. You're not tainted by this town's history. You have credibility I never had. Take everything I've collected. Take the map. Take it to someone outside Cooper's Bend. Someone with authority and integrity. Make them listen. Make them search that location. If those bones are still there, if they can be tested, modern DNA analysis could identify who they belong to. Maybe Lily. Maybe one of the others. Maybe it's the proof we need to finally expose what happened. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserved. I'm sorry I let my grief and my mission consume me. I'm sorry you grew up in the shadow of secrets I couldn't share. You deserve better. But you also deserve to know your sister. She was beautiful, Tobias. So full of life and joy. She would have loved you, and I know she would have been proud of the man you've become. Finish this for me. Finish it for Lily. Finish it for all those children who never got to grow up. With all my love. Mom. Tob read the letter 3 times through blurred vision. Then he found the map, carefully folded at the bottom of the envelope. It showed the woods near the old quarry, with the precise location marked in red ink. His mother had found where they'd buried the bodies. She'd found proof. Real, physical evidence that could crack this case wide open, and she died before she could use it. But Toby could. He would. He looked at the photo of Lily holding him as a baby, at her sweet face frozen in time. She'd been 4 years old when she died. 4 years old, and she'd spent 44 years lying in an unmarked grave while her killer walked free. Emma's voice startled him. She stood at the top of the attic stairs in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Dad? Why are you crying?" Toby quickly wiped his face. "Come here, sweetheart." Emma climbed up and sat beside him. He showed her the photos of Lily. "This is your Aunt Lily, my big sister. She died when I was a baby." Emma studied the photos with wide eyes. "She's pretty. What happened to her?" "Bad men took her," Toby said simply, "and Grandma spent her whole life trying to find out who they were." "Did she find out?" "Yes," Toby said. "She did. And now we're going to make sure everyone knows." Emma looked at the photos, then up at him. "Are we going to help Aunt Lily?" Toby pulled her close. "Yes, baby. We're going to help her finally rest in peace." He stayed up the rest of the night, organizing everything. The birth certificate, the missing persons report, the photos of Lily, his mother's letter, and most importantly, the map. This changed everything. He wasn't just going to Detective Chen with theories and circumstantial evidence anymore. He was going with the location of a burial site, with a case of child abduction and murder, with a trail of evidence that led directly to a former sheriff. The sun was rising when Toby finally finished preparing. He looked at the photo of Lily one more time, memorizing her face. "I'm going to finish this," he promised her. "I'm going to make sure you get justice, I swear it." And for the first time since finding those bags in the attic, Toby felt absolutely certain of what he had to do. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold. Toby packed everything carefully into 2 plastic storage containers. All the documentation, the photos, the recordings, his mother's journals, and most importantly, the letter and map about Lily. He made copies of everything first, storing them in a safety deposit box at the bank in the next town over. Emma helped him carry the containers to the truck. She'd been unusually quiet since learning about Lily, processing the information in that serious way children do when they realize the world is more complicated than they thought. "Are you scared?" she asked as Toby secured the containers in the truck bed. "A little," he admitted, "but I'm more determined than scared." Grandma was brave. Yes, she was. The bravest person I've known. They drove to Mrs. Chen's house, the neighbor who'd agreed to watch Emma for the day. Toby knelt down to Emma's level before she went inside. "I should be back this evening. If for some reason I'm not, Mrs. Chen has Detective Sarah Chen's number. You call her, okay? Tell her who you are and that you need to talk to her." "Okay," Emma said. Then she threw her arms around his neck. "Be careful, Dad." "I will. I love you, kiddo." "Love you too." The drive to the state police barracks took 3 hours. Toby spent the time rehearsing what he'd say, how he'd present the evidence. He needed to be clear, organized, convincing. His mother had been dismissed too many times because people thought she was emotional or unstable. Toby wouldn't give them that excuse. Detective Sarah Chen was waiting for him in a small conference room. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Toby at ease. She wasn't someone who would brush him off or patronize him. "Mr. Kern," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. I have to admit, your phone call intrigued me. Missing persons cases going back to the 60s, and you believe local law enforcement was involved in a cover-up?" "Not just a cover-up," Tobe said. "I believe they were directly involved in the disappearances, and I have evidence." He opened the first container and began laying out the documentation. Detective Chen's expression remained neutral at first, professional skepticism as she examined the newspaper, clippings and photos. But as Tobe walked her through the timeline, showing her the patterns, the connections, the same names appearing in case after case, he saw her interest sharpen. "Your mother documented all of this herself?" Chen asked. "Yes. She spent 40 years building this case. No one would listen to her. Why not? Because the main suspect was Sheriff Robert Walsh, and the men protecting him were the judge, the town council members, prominent businessmen. They controlled the narrative in Cooper's Bend." Chen made notes, her pen moving quickly across her pad. "Walk me through the most compelling evidence." Toby showed her the recording. They sat in silence as his mother's voice filled the room, describing what she'd witnessed at the grain mill. Chen's jaw tightened when Helen described Timothy Morrison in Walsh's car, unconscious or dead. "This recording is from 1995, Chen said when it ended. 29 years ago. Why didn't your mother use it?" "She was threatened. They broke into her house. They planted drugs in my car and threatened to arrest me if she didn't back off." Toby explained everything Jack had told him, everything his mother had written in her journals. Chen listened without interrupting, taking notes. When Toby finished, she sat back in her chair. "This is compelling," she said, "but it's also old. Most of the principals are dead. Walsh is retired and in his 80s. Even if we could prove criminal activity, the statute of limitations on most of it has expired." Tobe felt his heart sink. "So there's nothing you can do?" "I didn't say that." Chen leaned forward. "There's no statute of limitations on murder, and if what your mother believed is true, we're talking about multiple homicides. The problem is proof. We have your mother's testimony, which is hearsay now that she's passed. We have photos and observations, but nothing that directly proves a crime was committed." "What about the recording?" "It's powerful. But it's also just your mother describing what she claims to have seen. A defense attorney would tear it apart. We need physical evidence." Toby took a deep breath. "I have something else." He pulled out his mother's final letter and the map. He watched Chen's expression change as she read the letter, saw the moment when she grasped the significance of what she was holding. Your mother believed there's a burial site, Chen said slowly, and she marked the location. Yes, according to her research, bones were found near that quarry in 1978 but were never officially logged as evidence. She hired a private investigator who identified a location that matches the historical description. Chen studied the map carefully. If there are remains at this location, and if we can identify them through DNA analysis, that would be physical evidence of murder. That would change everything. Can you search it? Can you get a team out there? Not without probable cause. I'd need a warrant, and to get a warrant, I need to convince a judge that there's a reasonable expectation of finding evidence of a crime. She tapped the letter. This might be enough. Your mother's documented investigation, the pattern of disappearances, the connection to law enforcement. It builds a case for why remains might be there. How long will that take? I need to run this up my chain of command. This isn't a simple cold case. You're alleging corruption involving a former sheriff and other officials. That requires careful handling. She paused. Mr. Kern, if I pursue this, if I get authorization to investigate, it's going to get very public very fast. Your mother's name will be in the news. Your name will be in the news. The men you're accusing or their families will fight back. Are you prepared for that? Tob thought about Emma, about the life they were trying to build. He thought about his mother, spending 40 years in isolation and fear. He thought about Lily, buried somewhere in those woods for over 4 decades. I'm prepared, he said. Those families deserve answers. My sister deserves justice. Chen nodded slowly. Tell me about your sister. Toby pulled out the photos of Lily, the birth certificate, the missing persons report. He told Chen everything. How Lily had been taken, how his mother had witnessed Walsh in their yard, how her testimony had been dismissed, how she'd spent the rest of her life trying to prove what she knew was true. When he finished, Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she gathered up all the documents and photos, organizing them into neat stacks. I'm going to need to keep all of this, she said. I'll give you receipts for everything. I'll also need you to write out a formal statement. Everything you've told me today, everything you know about your mother's investigation, everything Jack Brennan told you. Can you do that? Yes. Good. I'm going to start the process of requesting a search warrant for that location. She pointed to the map. I'm also going to request the old case files from Cooper's Bend for all 12 disappearances. If there's been evidence suppression, we'll find it. What should I do? Go home. Take care of your daughter. Don't talk to anyone about this investigation. Not friends, not neighbors, nobody. If reporters contact you, refer them to me. She handed him her card. And Mr. Kern, watch your back. Most of the men involved are dead or too old to be threats. But people who've spent decades protecting secrets don't give them up easily. Toby spent another 2 hours writing out his statement, documenting everything he could remember. When he finally finished, his hand was cramped and his mind was exhausted. Chen walked him out to his truck. I want you to know, I believe you. I believe your mother. And I'm going to do everything in my power to get those families answers. Thank you, Toby said, shaking her hand. That means more than you know. He drove home as the sun was setting, his mind churning through everything that had happened. He'd done it. He'd handed over his mother's life's work to someone who would actually investigate, someone who would search for Lily. But as he pulled onto the highway, he noticed a car fall in behind him. Dark sedan, tinted windows, the same car he'd seen outside the farmhouse. Tobe's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He changed lanes. The car changed lanes. He took an exit. The car took the same exit. Someone was definitely following him. He pulled into a gas station and the car drove past, but slowly. Tobe caught a glimpse of the driver. Older man, gray hair, wearing sunglasses despite the fading light. His phone rang. Jack's number. Don't come back to Cooper's Bend tonight. Jack said without preamble. Word's gotten around that you met with state police. People are talking. It's not safe. How did word get around? I just left the meeting. Small towns have long ears, Tobe. Someone at the barracks, someone who knows someone. It doesn't take much. Just trust me. Stay away for tonight. I have to get Emma. I'll get her. I'll take her to my place. You find a motel somewhere else. Somewhere they won't think to look. Come back tomorrow in daylight with people around. Toby wanted to argue, but the dark sedan had circled back and was parked across the street, engine idling. Okay, he said. But Jack, you keep Emma safe. With my life, Jack promised. Now get moving. Toby drove in the opposite direction from Cooper's Bend, checking his mirrors constantly. The sedan didn't follow this time, but his heart didn't stop pounding until he'd put 50 miles between himself and that gas station. He found a motel in a town he'd never heard of and paid cash for a room. He tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind kept returning to one thought. He'd started something that couldn't be stopped now. The truth was going to come out, and someone was very unhappy about it. The next morning, Tobe's phone rang at 7. Detective Chen. I have good news, she said. I got the warrant. We're searching that location today. I have a forensic team and ground-penetrating radar equipment heading there now. Tobe's breath caught. You're searching for Lily. And any other remains that might be there. I'll call you when we find something. When? Not if. When? Toby closed his eyes and thought of his mother. After 40 years, her daughter might finally be coming home, and the men who'd taken her were about to face judgment. The call came at 3 in the afternoon. Toby had spent the day in the motel room, pacing, watching the news, jumping every time his phone buzzed. Jack had sent a text that morning confirming Emma was safe and happy, making pancakes at his house, playing with his old dog. That knowledge was the only thing keeping Toby from losing his mind. When Detective Chen's name finally appeared on his screen, Toby's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. We found something, Chen said without preamble. Multiple sets of remains. We're bringing in the full forensic team and the FBI. Toby sat down hard on the edge of the bed. How many? At least 4 distinct burial sites so far. The ground-penetrating radar is showing more possible locations. Mr. Kern, this is bigger than we thought. Your mother was right about everything. Can you identify them? The remains? It'll take time. We need to carefully excavate, document everything, collect samples for DNA analysis. But yes, we should be able to identify them. I've already contacted the families of the missing persons from your mother's documentation. They're being asked to provide DNA samples for comparison. What about Lily? Chen's voice softened. We found a site that matches the approximate age your mother indicated. Small skeletal remains, consistent with a young child. We'll prioritize that analysis. If you can provide a DNA sample, we can confirm identity. I'll do it, whatever you need. There's more, Chen said. We've started reviewing the old case files from Cooper's Bend. There are significant discrepancies between the official reports and what actually happened. Evidence that was collected but never logged. Witness statements that were altered or omitted. We're building a pattern of systematic cover-up. By Walsh. By Walsh and others. The FBI is taking over the investigation now. This is going to be a major case, Mr. Kern. Multiple homicides, police corruption spanning decades. It's going to be national news. Toby thought about his mother, dismissed and mocked for 40 years. Soon the whole world would know she'd been right all along. When can I come back to Cooper's Bend? I'd recommend waiting another day or two. Let us establish a presence there first. Make it clear this is now a federal investigation. Once that's done, you'll be safer. After they hung up, Toby sat in the silence of the motel room and let himself cry. For Lily. For his mother. For all those families who'd spent decades wondering what happened to their children, they were getting answers now. Finally, after all this time, they were getting the truth. His phone rang again. This time it was Jack. "Toby, you need to see the news. Turn on Channel 7. Toby grabbed the remote and turned on the television. The local news was showing footage of the quarry woods, police tape everywhere, state police vehicles and FBI cars lining the road. "Breaking news out of Cooper's Bend," the anchor was saying. "State police and FBI agents are conducting a major investigation at a wooded area near the old quarry. Sources say they're searching for human remains connected to multiple cold cases, dating back to the 1960s. The screen cut to Detective Chen giving a brief statement. "We're following up on credible information regarding several missing persons cases. This is an active investigation, and we'll have more details as they become available." Then the anchor dropped the bombshell. According to sources, the investigation was prompted by evidence collected over several decades by Cooper's Bend resident, Helen Kern, who passed away earlier this year. Her son, Tobias Kern, recently brought that evidence to state police. The screen showed a photo of the farmhouse, Tobe's truck in the driveway. Kern could not be reached for comment, the anchor continued, but neighbors describe him as a quiet man who moved back to town recently with his young daughter. Sources say Helen Kern spent years investigating what she believed was a conspiracy involving local law enforcement. Jack's voice came back on the line. "Toby, they're showing your house on TV. Everyone knows it was you who brought this to the police." "Is Emma okay?" "She's fine. She's watching cartoons in my living room, hasn't seen the news." "But Toby, people are going to react. Some will be grateful, some won't. I don't care what they think. I know, but be prepared. This town's about to tear itself apart." The news continued with interviews. One woman whose brother had disappeared in 1989 was crying with relief. "Finally, we might get answers. Helen Kern never stopped caring about our family's pain. God bless her." But there was another interview. A man Toby recognized as Thomas Garrett's son. "This is a witch hunt based on the paranoid delusions of a troubled woman. My father was a respected member of this community. He dedicated his life to helping find those missing kids. These accusations are outrageous." The lies were already starting. The denials, the attempts to protect reputations and legacies. But it wouldn't work this time. They had bodies now. They had evidence. The truth was coming out whether anyone wanted it to or not. Tobe's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen. "Your DNA sample can be done at any state police barracks. Closest one to you is in Jefferson City. Just tell them you're connected to the Cooper's Bend investigation." He texted back, "I'll go tomorrow morning." Then he lay back on the motel bed and closed his eyes. Somewhere in those woods, forensic teams were carefully excavating the remains of children who'd been missing for decades. One of them was almost certainly his sister. After 44 years, Lily was being found, and the men responsible were about to face justice. 3 days later, Toby received the call he'd been waiting for. "Mr. Kern, this is Detective Chen. We have preliminary DNA results." Toby had been helping Emma with her homework at Jack's kitchen table. He stood up and walked into the other room, his heart pounding. "Tell me. The remains we found at the primary burial site are a match to your DNA. We've identified them as Lily Ann Kern." Tobe's knees went weak. He'd known it was likely, had prepared himself for this moment, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that his sister had been found, hit him harder than he'd expected. "How?" His voice broke. "How did she die?" The medical examiner is still conducting analysis, but the preliminary findings indicate blunt force trauma to the skull. She died quickly, Mr. Curran. She didn't suffer long. Small mercy. Such a small mercy for a 4-year-old child. We've also identified 2 other sets of remains, Chen continued. Sarah Mitchum and Timothy Morrison. DNA matches to family members. We're still working on the fourth set, but we believe it may be Jennifer Holt, based on the estimated age and time of burial. 4 victims. So far, the ground-penetrating radar is showing 3 more possible burial sites. We're excavating carefully, but it's going to take time. What about Walsh? Have you arrested him? FBI agents arrested Robert Walsh this morning at his home in Millbrook. He's being charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, with more charges likely as we identify additional remains. We've also arrested his son, David Walsh, on charges of accessory after the fact and evidence tampering. His son was involved. David Walsh was a deputy in Cooper's Bend in the early 2000s. We found evidence he helped destroy case files and evidence logs related to the disappearances. He knew what his father had done and helped cover it up. Toby thought about that. A son protecting his father's horrific secrets. How many people had known? How many had looked the other way? Thomas Garrett died in 2019, Chen said, but we're investigating his estate and his family's possible involvement. Judge Henry Morrison is in a nursing home with advanced dementia, deemed incompetent to stand trial, but we're filing charges anyway for the record. The other men involved are all deceased. What happens now? Now we build the case. Your mother's documentation is crucial evidence. The recordings, the photos, her journals. They establish the pattern and show systematic suppression of evidence. We have physical evidence now, but your mother's work is what ties it all together. She never gave up, Toby said quietly. 40 years, and she never gave up. She was an extraordinary woman. What she did, maintaining that investigation alone with no resources, no support, everyone telling her she was wrong. That takes incredible strength and determination. After the call ended, Tobe stood in Jack's hallway for a long moment, processing everything. Then he went back to the kitchen where Emma was waiting. Was that about Aunt Lily? She asked. Yes. They found her, sweetheart. They confirmed it's her. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Can we bring her home? Yes. Once the investigation is complete, we can bury her properly. Give her a real funeral with a real headstone. And Grandma will know she found her. Toby pulled Emma into a hug. Grandma knows. Wherever she is, she knows. That evening, the news broke that arrests had been made. Robert Walsh's perp walk was shown on every channel. An 83-year-old man in handcuffs, looking frail and bitter as FBI agents led him out of his house. The media descended on Cooper's Bend. National news trucks lined Main Street. Reporters interviewed residents, getting reactions that ranged from shock to denial to quiet relief. Some people defended Walsh, called it a witch hunt, but more, many more, spoke about always knowing something was wrong, about the strange way cases were handled, about the culture of silence that had pervaded the town for decades. Helen Kern's name was everywhere. The woman who'd been dismissed as paranoid and unstable was now being called a hero. Her documentation was described as meticulous, courageous, essential to cracking the case. Togue gave one interview, brief and carefully worded. He spoke about his mother's dedication to truth, about Lily, about the other families finally getting closure. He didn't express anger or call for vengeance. He simply stated facts and asked that people remember the victims, not just the crimes. The following week, Detective Chen called again. We've identified the 4th set of remains. Jennifer Holt, as we suspected. And we've found 3 more burial sites. 7 victims total, all matching names from your mother's documentation. 7 children. 7 young people whose lives had been stolen by a predator who'd hidden behind a badge for decades. But they weren't forgotten anymore. Helen Kern had made sure of that. And now, finally, they were coming home. Toby stood at his mother's grave the next day, Emma beside him. He'd brought flowers, white lilies, for the daughter she'd never stopped searching for. You did it, Mom, he said quietly. You found her. You found all of them. You were right. and now everyone knows it. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for just a moment, Toby felt something like peace. 6 months later, on a clear October morning, Toby stood in the cemetery with Emma at his side and watched as they lowered Lily's small casket into the ground beside their mother's grave. The service was simple but well attended. Families of the other victims had come to pay their respects. Jack was there, of course, along with Detective Chen and several of the investigators who'd worked the case. Even some reporters had shown up, keeping a respectful distance. The minister spoke about innocence lost and justice delayed but not denied. He spoke about Helen Kern's unwavering commitment to truth, about a mother's love that transcended death. Toby held Emma's hand and tried not to cry, but when they lowered the casket, he couldn't help it. "Rest now, Lily," he whispered. "You're home. You're finally home." After the service, people approached to offer condolences. Sarah Mitchum's mother, now elderly and frail, hugged Tobe with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for finishing what your mother started. My Sarah can rest now. We all can." Timothy Morrison's sister shook his hand firmly. "Your mother was braver than anyone gave her credit for. She fought when the rest of us couldn't." One by one, they came. 7 families who'd lived with uncertainty for decades, who'd been told their loved ones ran away or got lost or simply vanished. Now they had answers. Now they had closure. Now they could grieve properly and begin to heal. Detective Chen approached as the crowd was dispersing. "The trial starts in 3 weeks," she said. "Are you prepared to testify?" "I am," Toby said. "Whatever it takes." Robert Walsh had pleaded not guilty, his lawyers claiming the evidence was circumstantial, that the case against him was built on the unreliable testimony of a dead woman. But the prosecution had more than Helen's documentation. They had forensic evidence, DNA matches, witness testimony from people who'd finally felt safe enough to come forward. They had the recording of Walsh and Garrett moving Timothy Morrison's body. They had proof of evidence tampering and case file destruction. The trial would be brutal, would dredge up painful memories and ugly truths. But Tobe was ready. He owed his mother that much. He owed Lily. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, look." She pointed to the new headstone they'd placed for Lily. Simple white marble, engraved with her name, dates, and a single line. "Forever loved, never forgotten." Beside it was their mother's stone, which Toby had replaced with a new one. It read, "Helen Elizabeth Kern, devoted mother, tireless seeker of truth." She never gave up. The 2 graves, side by side, mother and daughter reunited at last. As they walked back to the truck, Toby looked up at the farmhouse visible on the hill. He'd finished the renovations over the past few months. The place looked better than it had in decades. Fresh paint, new roof, the porch solid and level. Emma's attic room was bright and cheerful, filled with her drawings and books. The house that had held so many secrets was now just a home, a place where a father and daughter were building a new life, free from the shadows of the past. "Can we plant flowers on their graves?" Emma asked, "like the ones Grandma used to grow?" "I think that's a perfect idea." They stopped at the nursery on the way home and picked out bulbs, tulips and daffodils and hyacinths. Flowers that would come back every spring, year after year, bringing color and life to that quiet corner of the cemetery. Back at the farmhouse, Toby found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting. Jack. Inside was a newspaper clipping, an editorial from the Cooper's Bend Gazette. The new editor, a young woman who'd moved to town after the scandal broke, had written about the importance of truth-telling, about how communities heal not by burying their past, but by confronting it. Helen Kern paid a terrible price for speaking truth, the editorial read. She was ostracized, dismissed, and disbelieved. But she persisted because she understood something fundamental. Justice matters more than comfort. Truth matters more than reputation. And the victims, the children who were taken, the families who suffered, they mattered most of all. The editorial concluded, "We failed Helen Kern. We failed her daughter Lily. We failed all the victims. But we can honor their memory by ensuring nothing like this ever happens again. By listening when people speak uncomfortable truths. By investigating thoroughly, even when it implicates powerful people. By never, ever choosing silence over justice." Toby pinned the article to the refrigerator, next to Emma's drawings in her school papers. That evening, he and Emma sat at the old kitchen table, the same table where his mother had sat alone for so many years. They worked on Emma's homework together, normal and domestic and peaceful. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her math worksheet, "do you think Grandma would be proud of us?" Toby thought about his mother, about her 40 years of solitary investigation, about the attic full of carefully documented evidence, about her final letter telling him to finish what she'd started. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think she would be." "And Aunt Lily?" "Her too." Emma smiled and went back to her homework, and Toby sat there watching her, thinking about family and legacy, and the weight of secrets finally lifted. Outside, the Missouri sun was setting over the fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The farmhouse, once a repository of darkness and hidden truths, was filled with the simple sounds of life. A child's pencil scratching on the paper, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock on the wall. Toby looked at the photos on the mantel. His mother and Lily, side by side now in death as they should have been in life. And beside them, a new photo. Tobe and Emma, smiling in front of the renovated farmhouse. 3 generations of Kerns, one lost to violence, one who spent her life fighting for justice, one growing up in the light of truth finally told. The past couldn't be changed, the stolen years couldn't be recovered, but they could be honored, they could be remembered. And the truth his mother had died protecting, the truth that had cost her everything, that truth would endure. In the attic above them, the space was empty now except for Emma's furniture and toys. All the bags, all the documentation, all the evidence had been turned over to authorities or archived for the trial. The secrets were gone. Only light remained. And that, Toby thought as he helped Emma with her fractions, was exactly as it should be. His mother had carried her burden alone for 40 years, but she'd also left behind a map, a mission, and a son who refused to let her fight be in vain. The conspiracy was exposed, the victims were found, the guilty were facing justice. And somewhere, Tobe liked to believe, Helen and Lily Kern were finally, peacefully, together at last.